All right, so we have Rishab I'm going to restart this one. We have Rishab Mazumdar, which has a question for us on YouTube, and he says, "Hi. It was very informative," he says, when watching our first video about earthquakes in New Zealand. "But I was thinking about immigrating full-time to New Zealand after the pandemic ends." Well, you talk a lot about earthquake, but what about floods, tsunami, etc.? Today I heard in the news that New Zealand was hit by 3 earthquakes followed by a tsunami. So is New Zealand safe for living there permanently? Thanks in advance. All right, Rishab. So the first thing that I want to point out is that most of the threats in New Zealand, environmental threats, will be either coming from volcanoes or from earthquake, right? So when we talk about floods and tsunamis and all those kind of things, they're usually caused by earthquake off the shores of New Zealand, which therefore are going to be bringing some waves in the country. And this was very much highlighted this week when we had some earthquake off the shore of the Kermadec Islands. And those earthquakes triggered tsunami warning in New Zealand and throughout some of the Pacific Islands as well, because sometimes when you do have rumbling under the ocean floor, it can create really massive waves which could therefore flood the land. So here's a quick recap of what happened in New Zealand this week, so you have a little bit of context, and then we're going to be talking about earthquake and safety in New Zealand, just around the end of the video. All right, so what happened this week? So an early Friday morning, that was the 5th of March 2021, there was 3 large earthquakes that occurred off the shore of New Zealand. They begin with the 7.1 earthquake, which was around the East Cape area of New Zealand. And it was felt across the country. To be quite fair, we are in the central northern end, and we did not feel it, but some of our neighbors did. So maybe we're just too sound asleep when that happened. Then there was a few hours later a 7.4 earthquake and a 8.1 earthquake in the Kermadec, which is a group of islands all the way on the north of New Zealand. It's very far offshore. So there was an app called GeoNet in which most people kind of record earthquake and also kind of give you alerts and everything. And they received about 52,000 reports. So there's a lot of people feeling it. Now, when it came to tsunami, the NEMA, National Emergency Management Agency, issued a tsunami alert to the public following this event. And they were expecting arrival of 35 to 40 centimeter waves around the East Cape and 15 to 20 centimeters wave around Great Barrier Island. It turned out that there was some a little bit of extra waves, but nothing major, and it didn't really affect any of the residents. So after the evacuation, about 4 hours later, they went back home. Then they had to come back out, and then 4 hours later again they came back home. So basically, it was just a day of evacuating and coming back and evacuating, coming back, but nothing really happened. So there was not much threat to people and properties. All right, so that's basically what was in the news and what the media made a big deal out of. That was this whole tsunami warning. Now, is New Zealand safe from earthquake, or is New Zealand safe to live in anyway?
Yeah, so of course New Zealand is on a major sort of fault line, and that's why it does have quite a few earthquakes in New Zealand, but most earthquakes that do occur are imperceptible to humans. We can't feel them whatsoever, and they're so small, they're kind of insignificant. But every so often, usually between 2.5 to 3 years, there is an earthquake that is around magnitude 7, which is when it's more likely to damage properties or affect humans in some sort of way, but of course only if it occurs in a place that is close to a populated or urbanized area where it's going to cause more damage than a lot of the more rural parts that there are in New Zealand. So in the course of human history in New Zealand, there's only been actually a few earthquakes that have had fatalities, and that have been obviously a bit more significant. But just to note, out of the 14 major earthquakes that have occurred in New Zealand during the time that humans have been recording this, only 11 have had earthquakes that have had under 10 earthquake fatalities. I'm getting stumbling all over my words. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the history of earthquakes in New Zealand, there was one in the Wairarapa in 1855, which only had 9 casualties. In Murchison in 1929, there was 17 casualties. In Napier in 1931, there were 256 casualties. In Christchurch during 2011, there was 185 casualties. And in Kaikoura during 2016, there was 2 casualties. So that's a list of sort of the major earthquakes that have happened in New Zealand that have actually affected human lives or, obviously had fatalities. So, yeah, in the context of how many earthquakes there are in New Zealand compared to how many actually affect people, it's quite small the amount that actually affect people in New Zealand. So just to bear that in mind if you are a little bit iffy about moving to New Zealand or traveling to New Zealand purely if you're afraid of coming because of earthquakes, then just bear in mind that earthquakes affecting people is usually very, very rare. So the question is, are earthquakes a big deal? And in the media, it certainly is. It's something to talk about whenever there's a natural disaster in sort of a developed country. People usually, the media kind of bigs it up a little bit and makes it kind of a big thing. But compared to how it actually affects people in New Zealand, earthquakes that are actually felt is kind of part of normal life in New Zealand. Sometimes you can feel the odd earthquake, but it doesn't really do any damage, or you don't feel earthquakes at all. So usually it's just people like, oh, did you feel that earthquake last night? And they're just like, yeah, and they move on with their day. It's kind of not really seen as a major deal, but yeah, of course, people are prepared for earthquakes. They're taught in New Zealand schools, like what to do if you're experiencing a major earthquake. Just for you guys to know, if you are ever in New Zealand and you do experience an earthquake, the thing that's sort of taught over here is drop, cover, and hold. So that kind of means if you do feel like major shaking, like a major earthquake, then you drop down to your hands and knees so you're able to move around while, you're actually, so you're not falling over if you're on your feet. You cover, so if you have nothing to actually cover yourself with, you cover your hands and the back of your neck with your arms. But if you are able to cover your entire body by going under a sturdy table or some other sturdy furniture, then get towards that furniture and hide underneath. And hold means basically hold on to whatever furniture or structure that you've decided to put yourself underneath and hold on for your life. But that makes it sound a little bit more extreme than it really is.
To be fair, we did feel some earthquakes in New Zealand, and they were pretty minor, and most of the houses are well built, and most of the buildings are well built as well. So you are not,
Yeah. Also, since the Christchurch earthquake that happened in 2011, like New Zealand had a big sort of change in their regulations for public buildings. So now a public building needs to be earthquake strengthened. And that's why you'll often see, if you're traveling around New Zealand and you see historic buildings, a lot of them are closed so that they can be earthquake strengthened. And that's been going on for a few years now. But yeah, slowly but surely they're getting through all the buildings and making sure that they're all earthquake strengthened. And there's a lot of research that happens in New Zealand for prevention and detecting earthquakes. So New Zealand's kind of one of the better countries to be in for if that is on a fault line, because they're kind of very prepared for earthquakes and can detect it. And as you saw from yesterday, the places not yesterday, but this week, as you saw from this week, the places around New Zealand that had the tsunami warning, they evacuated those towns and stuff. So they are prepared and have safety protocols in place for when that does occur.
All right, so if you do want more information about earthquakes and tsunami and everything in New Zealand, we do have some information on nzpocketguide.com. You can find a link to that very specific article right in the description of the video. And You also have some amazing websites like NEMA, as well as the app called GeoNet, which are perfect to be able to kind of be appraised of what happens in New Zealand. Again, the medias are usually making a really big deal of something which is a common daily occurrence here in New Zealand. If you did find this video useful, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll go back to the live chat.